Next on the list, I am up here, and I am going to be doing a series called Arumajuga Shinumade, or also known as Once Upon a Witch's Death. And if you look at the artwork and kind of like some of the clips and stuff like that, you might be like, this is like Little Witch Academia or Majo no Tabi Tabi or whatever. But it's kind of not. But this is a light novel original by Saka. So this Saka is the writer. This is their first work, and are drawn by Chore Fuji. Again, this is also kind of their first work or major named work. This also does have a separate manga adaptation, and then now got an anime adaptation here. This adaptation is brought to you by EMT Square Productions. Although they have at least a couple of subcontractors in the wings, they have most notably Studio Jack as the background art, and T2 Studio with the color design, which you'll see a lot of the staff members stuff like editing, stuff like that, uh, photography, so on. Be aligned with those two subcontractor studios. So in general, EMT Square does for this time, they brought in director Nigorikawa Atsushi, who is sort of one of their core members. He directed Beast Tamer as well as Love Tyrant with EMT Squared, and he worked on a few other series with the studio as well, mainly under stuff like animation direction and stuff like that, and my background art, second animation work, stuff like that. Um, so he's directing, and EMT Squared brought alongside some experienced people, mainly via their multiple subcontractors in Studio Jack and T2 Studios. So you can kind of see that panning out in their visual animation direction kind of staff members and departments. I would say relatively solid team for EMT Squared here. Um, Going over to voice acting staff real quickly. So mostly, I think pretty much all of these names, most people that have watched anime in the past couple of years to like 5, 10 years should know what these names are. You have Ayama Yoshino, you know, we're talking like Bochidorok here. We have Suzuki Aina, Tanazaki Atsumi, Yomiya Hina, Rising Star Yomiya Hina, Okubo Rumi, Ito Shizuka, Hikasa Yoko, all names that we all know and love. The only kind of names that might be a little bit confusing to maybe some of the people who are kind of only tuned in to watching, series from past couple of years or so. We have Sakakibari Yoshiko as Faust, who is the one of the older kind of like mentor witch to the main character. She is most famous for doing Halan Khan in Mobile Suit Gundam, ZZ, and Ana in Overwatch. And then we have a newcomer, not newcomer, but one that is sort of an up and comer in Hanai Miharu. And she did Twin Turbo. She's most famous for doing Twin Turbo in Uma Musume. So relatively pretty loaded cast here. I would say. Going over opening, ending. The opening theme is Drops by Sakamoto Maya. Sakamoto Maya, obviously a very prolific voice actress as well as a singer. I would say in terms of like the opening itself, the anime opening itself, the storyboard was okay in terms of design, but I would say the sort of actual visual quality in itself was a little bit budget, um, which is a little bit unfortunate. The song itself, the song composition was very, very, very much geared towards showing off this sort of, I want to say, a quieter version of the classic, breathy, yet very clean Maya Sakamoto vocals that we all know and love. If you haven't heard of Maya Sakamoto singing before, you should. It's a very nice kind of, it's very clean is how I'd say it. It still has this vocal strength, but it's very, very, very like the diction and everything else, and the vocal strength is very, very well balanced. And it's a classic. It's a classic, kind of in the same style of Maya Sakamoto openings that we all know and love. Again, with from songs like Platinum, Cardcaptor Sakura OP, magic number, Komotopi, B minus Vezopi. It has those sorts of qualities from Sakamoto Maya. So pretty nice. The ending theme itself is Hanasaku Michite, Hanasaku Michite, or On the Road Where the Flowers Bloom by Teshima Aoi. Teshima Aoi, singer, voice actress, has done quite a lot of like openings and insert songs and stuff like that for uh, Miyazaki Goro films. Um, I would say for this one, for the ending, the storyboard was relatively whatever, but the song itself was very good. Obviously, great vocal work from Teshima Aoi. Obviously, there's a reason why she's prolific, right? So, pretty good work for I want to say song wise for both the opening and the ending. I think you guys should listen to both of them. Overall, in terms of the audio visuals, I mean the visuals are fine, but I would say it's like uh it's pretty focused on kind of having that simplistic slice of life kind of v- visuals in terms of like almost like a comedy like four girls in a like girls in a club, that sort of slow life-ish paced healing series. And there's very minimal like animation slash action except for like the sort of comedic like the back and forth like transition frame, the back and forth like animation frames, like when somebody's waving their arms around, right? Those like simplified animations, they work decently enough. I think that plus the character models carry the series quite far. The battle sequences are pretty standard. They're okay, but most of it is kind of very how do I say it? Very standard like CGI like magic circles and like flare effects and like yeah, it's CGI kind of like fireball kind of stuff. So um I want to say most of that sort of using the magic and so on is really not much to write home about. But the 2D parts of that sort of like some of like the magic animations, again, the character designs, the comedic kind of animation stuff is done quite well. The audio part, uh, I believe the music is done by Tateyama Akiki, who is the composer of Yudu Camp, as well as more recently Wakagimi, also known as the Elusive Samurai, right? And he has he knows what he's doing, right? It's a pretty decent, pretty relaxing, mostly BGM set by this composer. Obviously corresponding with the pace of the story, very interesting use of kind of this violent string section with a lot of like happier bridges, happier kind of sections during like kind of bittersweet moments, which I thought was a very interesting choice to use for the OST and kind of sound direction in general. So it was quite good. I would say both the audio part and the visual part were quite solid on both counts. So, but yeah, moving on to the overall story. So, just a quick synopsis. They Our main character, our main heroine, is called what is it, Meg Raspberry or something like that. It's like, yeah, Meg Raspberry. So she is apprentice witch who has just hit the age of 17, and her teacher, her teacher mentor, who is a long-lived witch, an old witch named Faust, tells her that she has only 1 year to live. However, there is an exception. She has to take this magical bottle, a potion like bottle or whatever, and fill it with the tears of strong emotions, mainly like the tears of joy, preferably, but mostly any sort of tears of like kind of, I guess in general, like cathartic emotions in a sense. If you make people
So
feel
torture is
strong
out of the
emotion,
question.
what?
I said so is torture off the table for
The
her. Or,
waterboarding? Yeah,
yeah.
waterboarding. George Bush tactics are out of the question, unfortunately. Um, But if you make people feel strong, generally powerfully like positive-ish feelings, is probably what it's implied. You can fill up the potion bottle, and if you fill up the potion bottle with 1,000 people's tears, she'll be able to live. Um, she'll be able to continue to live. So she kind of takes that and goes out and starts participating in the world. This is not necessarily, I mean, she goes to different places, but it's not necessarily like she's actually just journeying from city to city and just going everywhere. It's not like a Majo no Tabi Tabi kind of thing. There's a lot of things where she kind of still stays in the general town area where she lives or where she worked. But she goes out and tries to, find people and, talk to people, and she gets caught up in the way along the way with various people that are related to her mentor, just friends around her, her connections, and her kind of network grows. And so the general pace of the story is that there's a strong kind of outer, I want to say, layer, this shell of comedy. And the dialogue and everything else is just constantly, when it's not talking about deep matters, right? Anytime it's not talking about deep matters, pretty much the dialogue is always very like snappy, almost like Marvel, MCU-ish like vibes, right? Um, they don't go for necessarily like the puns and like the witty retorts all the time, but it's a very anytime that's not like super serious, it's always like a very like snappy, trying to aim for comedy, trying to be like, hey, like like are you really like, is that really what you're saying, or like, hey man, you're being a little bit weird, that sort of like back and forth dialogue. Um so the dialogue itself generally does, the regular dialogue just try to aim for that sort of like comedic aspect a lot. Um, the earlier episodes does start talking about a lot about death and how kind of people interact with it, accept it, so on, which was, I think, it's always a very interesting subject for me for people to cover in literature, obviously. And um, despite it being such like a deep, kind of proper, interesting topic to cover, uh, I don't think people have covered it properly as much in anime. I think a lot of it's still just kind of like, I have lived a good life. Now it's time for me to pass, and it's fine. And that's sort of like the extent of it. But there are some slightly deeper kind of nudges that this series does make, which is quite nice. But after that, it kind of devolves into Meg kind of meeting various people, the cast introducing various different characters, and it kind of settles into a more relaxed pace where a lot of it's just kind of Meg kind of talking with these different people and kind of getting to know more about them and kind of being more friendly and kind of just doing various things, big and small, in the world. And it is nice. It is relaxing, I guess, in a sense. And the premise, it's kind of it does kind of end up being similar to something like a Majo no Tabi Tabi, or like a lot of like these other kind of journey series where it's like, how do I say this? In a lot of these series, right? Uh, the starting premise, right? The motivating premise oftentimes tends to go by the wayside, minus plus or like every once in a while something small will come up, but it's like until the very end, the journey oftentimes isn't really continually linked back to the premise. And I think, for instance, like Near, you might be familiar with this, where it's like, um you've also kind of read some of these series, right? Like Sabikui Bisco, I think, was one of the more recent stuff. Obviously, something like Natsume Jincho. There are
Yeah.
some of these more episodic stuff, but it's like a lot of them. eh, you have a premise of, oh, I need to go out because I need to do something, or like I will, uh, I need to find my father's lost necklace or whatever it is, like
Yeah,
some
the promised
bullshit.
land or whatever.
Yeah, 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 and then they go out, and it just becomes an episodic anime, right? Or,
Yep.
like, it becomes a mini
Yeah,
arc,
of
series of
course.
mini arcs. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it does kind of, at least from what I'm seeing, at least this initially, again, I have not read the manga, I apologize. Um, or I have not read the light novel either. I apologize, but it kind of seems like it's kind of panning out into, at least currently, a very standard. I'm just kind of meet people. These people are nice. We just have these like random kind of adventures, and it kind of spreads out into that. I'm sure um, pro well, I'm somewhat sure that down the road they'll kind of wrap back into the, "Hey, you gotta collect more emotional tears. Here's some, people that are, that might like die or like they're facing sad moments due to, people suffering or whatever, and you gotta help them." I'm sure that'll happen a little bit more down the line. But right now, it's a lot of very, like, relaxing, go nowhere. Just here's a character, here's another member of the cast, here's another member of the cast, here's how they interact with Meg. They're having a fun time, that sort of thing. And again, I think that's okay, but it does seem to kind of devolve into that very standard journey style story, except she's not really going out of her way to visit all these different towns. It's more that the characters are coming to her instead in this case. But structurally, or rather thematically, it's more or less the same thing. She's kind of meeting different people and she's like, oh, okay. And then she's kind of losing sight of the original premise. In that sense, again, I don't know how deeply it'll go back into Meg and her quest to help people and, evoke positive emotions and not die in a year or whatever. But right now, I think it's okay. I don't think it's like a masterpiece, but I think all aspects of it are like decent to solid and not something that I can really be like, "Oh, this kinda sucks," or whatever. I can't really necessarily point out, like, a specific bad thing about it. That being said, I don't think it's how do I say this? I, uh, I think the kind of part where it slightly loses points here is that in a lot of, like, journey series, like, you meet the characters, but then they also have, like, problems or they have, like, specific things in that mini arc that the character kinda deals with or, like, at least observes, and it's like, "Oh, so this is how this world works," or whatever, right? They gain worldly experience, and that's a big part of this, like, journey-themed series, I would say, right? Like, the protagonist grows wiser by taking on this journey by going on this journey. Maybe they become more mellow or whatever it is, right? Um, that being said, I don't think Meg and like her kind of being introduced to all these characters is really making her that much better. I don't think the general like world like, the cast is being developed, but there's not a sense of like, "Oh, Meg is really growing as a person," kind of thing going on, or like, she's really going through, like, these changes and she's, like, helping out people or whatever. A lot of it's just like, "Here's one more cast character. Here's another cast member," and while people might be like, "Well, they're just kind of developing the cast right now." It's already 6 episodes in, so it's like, you know what I mean? You gotta kinda hurry it up if this is gonna be like 12, 13 episode series. So, maybe there's gonna be a season 2, I don't know. Maybe this is just gonna be a promotional anime for the light novel. That might be a little bit disappointing, but I think right now it's a little bit too plain. It could use a little bit more meat, I want to say, on the whole like Meg interacts with these characters that have just been introduced, and this is how her perspective has changed, or this is how she grows through the experience, or whatever. And it doesn't necessarily have to be always like super cathartic, like starting from something suffering and then become cathartic because she solved it or whatever. It doesn't necessarily have to be like, oh, I met with a girl, but her mother's suffering, but I managed to heal her or I managed to let her pass away in a happy manner. It doesn't necessarily always have to be like that. I would like some more obvious visual aspects or story aspects where it's obvious that Meg is actually learning and like going through changes as she meets all these characters. And it's not just, hey, these characters exist in this world now. So, um, but yeah, I think that's pretty much actually all I really had for this series. I wish it would, it's not, no part of it's like specifically really bad, but I wish it's some parts of it a little bit flat story aspect wise. And I do wish, I think it was a little bit more, there was a little bit more meat to the bones, is how it's saying. Overall, I'll give it probably a 6 or 6.5 out of 10. I think it's solidly above average, but I don't think it necessarily goes into the wow. Like I would seriously start recommending it to people if it doesn't really go into that region. So 6 or 6.5 out of 10. I think that's a pretty solid score for me. I don't think there's, and especially with the disclaimer that I don't think there's anything specifically bad to point out. It's just some parts are a little bit flat. Uh, but yeah, that's pretty much I think all about I can give it for now. But I think that's still pretty decent, I would say for me. So, but yeah, that was pretty much it. This was again Out of Majo ga Shinumade, also known as Once Upon a Witch's Death. So, this was a light novel original, got adapted into manga and now an anime by EMT Squared. If you like this sort of like very slower paced, kind of, I would say more positive tones, despite there are like serious themings, but the positive, but the tones are positive. It's not just like, oh, there's it's just death and like we have to just face it head on. It's like some people are just born on this earth to suffer. And it's not that like Batman, DC comics kind of like serious kind of vibes. A lot of it's very positive. Despite there being again the serious themes. So if you kind of want that like positive tone, that positive timbre despite there being serious themes, I would suggest maybe you try checking this out. It's pretty nice.